Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a huge economic story, one about an incredible breakout that's just slammed into a massive wall. And believe me, the consequences are global.
So what we're looking at here is this huge economic story unfolding, well, right now. It's a classic tale, really. A story of incredible, explosive growth hitting what feels like an immovable object.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, what happens now? Well, to even begin to answer that, we've got to understand the sheer force of India's economic rise. It's been something else.
So, let's do just that. Let's put this growth under a microscope. Because over the last decade, we're not just talking about a little bit of growth. No, India completely changed its spot on the world stage. It's a total transformation.
And the official numbers? I mean, they tell a pretty stunning story. Take a look at the global export rankings over the last 10 years. In precious stones, for instance, India just rocketed from 11th place all the way to number 1. Think about that. That's not just a leap, that is a massive jump.
And this wasn't some one-trick pony. The growth in value across so many different sectors is honestly staggering. You've got petroleum oils jumping by over $24 billion a year. Insecticides, they more than doubled. Sugar, more than tripled. You see, this kind of diversification, it shows a really mature economy. This isn't just a minor uptick. It's a genuine explosion of value.
So it wasn't just about selling more stuff, it was about actually dominating entire markets. Look at this. India's share of the global precious stones market went from less than 3% to over 36%. That's wild. For petroleum and sugar, its global market share basically doubled. What this really means is that India was weaving itself into the very fabric of global supply chains, making itself indispensable.
But you know how these stories go. Just as this economic engine was hitting top speed, it slammed head-on into a massive wall.
And that wall came in the form of a 50% tariff. In August of 2025, the U.S. slapped on this steep penalty, bringing the total duty on a whole range of Indian goods to a staggering 50%. That's a number you just don't see very often in modern trade.
And the speed of it all was just breathtaking. I mean, this whole thing kicked off with a tariff announcement in April, and by the end of August, just one summer, it had snowballed into the full 50%. Blank and you would have missed it.
So you have to ask, why? Why the sudden wall? Well, according to reports from India Today, the official reason given was geopolitical. The penalty was positioned as a direct response to India's ongoing trade with Russia. So what we're seeing is a trade tool being used as a pretty heavy-handed foreign policy lever.
And when you look closer, you see just how strategic, how surgical these tariffs were. ClearTax reports show that, yeah, labor-intensive sectors like textiles and jewelry got hit hard, but other key areas, they were carefully exempted. Take pharmaceuticals. They stayed at 0%, and that's a huge detail, right? Especially when you remember that India supplies about half of all generic drugs to the U.S. market. So this wasn't a sledgehammer. It was more like a scalpel, designed to inflict very specific pain while trying to minimize the blowback.
Now, an impact like this, it doesn't just stop at the border or with the price of goods. It sends a chill, a real shiver through the entire economy.
And you don't have to take my word for it. As Nobel-winning economist Paul Krugman pointed out in the Indian Express, there's basically a consensus on this. Economists agree. Tariffs are inflationary. Those costs, they don't just disappear, they get passed on to buyers. It's Econ 101, really. Tariffs almost always lead to higher prices for you and me. In other words, inflation.
And that's where we start hearing the dreaded S word, stagflation. It's this really toxic brew, a mix of a slowing economy, that's the stagnation part, and rising prices, the inflation part. For anyone trying to manage an economy, it is the absolute worst of both world scenarios.
So you can imagine the headache this creates for India's central bank, the RBI. They're caught in a total bind. Their job of juggling inflation and growth just got exponentially harder. On one hand, tariffs are pushing inflation up. On the other hand, the economy is slowing down. They're basically forced into this wait-and-watch mode, with their hands tied, unable to cut interest rates to give the economy a boost.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about macroeconomics and policy, but let's bring this down from 30,000 feet. Because these aren't just numbers on a chart. This has a very real, very human cost on the ground.
Al Jazeera has stories from people like Kalpesh Patel, a diamond unit owner in Surat, which is known as India's Diamond City. And what he says is just heartbreaking. He says they're on the brink. For an industry that was already struggling, he's worried these tariffs could be the final devastating blow. He even mentioned they might have to shut down before Diwali, which is the biggest festival in the country. It's just crushing.
And the stakes here are just incredibly high.
We're not talking about profit margins anymore. We're talking about people's lives. In just that one industry, in just that one state, Al Jazeera reports that up to 200,000 people could lose their jobs. 200,000. That's a staggering number of families affected.
And this wave of uncertainty, it's rippling all the way out to everyday investors. You can literally see the anxiety playing out in real time on places like Reddit. People are debating, do I sell my stocks or do I hodl? You know, that internet slang for hold on for dear life and just pray for a rebound. It's this crisis of confidence that's stretching all the way from the factory floor to the average person's retirement account.
So you have this massive challenge. The big question is, what's the playbook? How is India navigating this storm?
Well, the government seems to be rolling out a four-pronged strategy. And interestingly, it's not about immediate retaliation. Instead, the focus is on two main things: diplomacy abroad and cushioning the blow at home. That means things like loan guarantees for the little guys, the micro, small, and medium businesses, while at the same time scrambling to find new markets for their goods and making the domestic economy stronger.
And that's the government's plan. But outside of that, economists are chiming in with their own recommendations for the long game. A FICCI survey points to a few key things. You've got to boost demand at home, maybe through tax reviews, invest smartly in big sectors like agriculture and green energy, and crucially, invest in people through skilling initiatives. The idea is to build a more resilient economy for the future.
So that's where we are. It all comes down to this one massive question. On one side, you have India's undeniable decade-long momentum and its proven resilience. On the other, you have this very real, very high trade wall. Which force is going to prove stronger, the breakout or the barrier? The answer to that will likely define India's economic story for years to come.